I wanted to do another video on filter safety. Now, if you're not interested in filter safety, just turn off the video. Because quite often when I do these videos, people say, "Stop telling me the GP5 filter has asbestos in. I know it has asbestos in." But lots of people still don't. Lots of people keep badgering me about, is this filter safe, is that filter safe? So what I want to do in this video is try and just make a rule set you can follow that should keep you safe with gas mask filters, respirator filters and anything like that. So the first one is obviously know that there is hazardous stuff in lots of old filters and might still be hazardous stuff in modern filters. Basically, the thing I need to stress about gas masks and respirators they are there to protect you or save your life. They are not there for people like me to collect, people like you to collect, and wear for fun. If you're doing that, you're kind of defeating the point of why they were made, which is absolutely fine, but you have to remember that a lot of filters and sort of safety equipment often has a risk factor to it, but that risk factor is much lower than the stuff you're exposed to. So if you had an old filter that had asbestos and some other dodgy components in, it's much better to be breathing through a filter like that than breathing some horrible gas that would otherwise kill you. So that was the logic behind the filters. However, it's not a good idea to then just go huffing through one of these filters anyway. So, as I said, old filters have asbestos in. The common logic people used to use was if a filter was a NATO filter made after the 1950s, it was safe. And if it was a Soviet filter, I think normally they used the date built after 1972, it was safe, which I think is a really stupid thing to go by. And the reason I say that is there's been so many sources now, and I'll put a couple in the description, but you'll be able to find more, where GP5 filters or other Soviet filters have been tested from, between the 1960s or so and up to the late 1980s, sometimes even 1990, 1991, and they contained both white and blue asbestos. So what that means is there was never a safety cut-off date for these filters, because for some reason people seem to think that the Soviet Union stopped using asbestos in 1972. They clearly didn't. So if you have an old Soviet filter, don't breathe through it. In theory, if it's not leaking, it's safe, but I don't like using things like that, because it's like playing Russian roulette, pardon the pun of it being a Soviet filter. But if you have something that's got something in that could give you lung cancer and lung damage, and as long as something inside doesn't rip and let it through, you're fine. Using it just because it's not leaking now does not mean that you're not going to be breathing in asbestos fibres at some point. So, obviously, the rule I'm going to say that applies to filters, I think, really, is rather than using the logic of burden of proof and you have to prove that there's asbestos or dodgy stuff in the filter, I think we should actually look at it as what filters do we know to be safe and what filters have been made recently. Now the reason I say that is obviously once a filter gets beyond a certain age it doesn't work anymore, because parts inside the filter, even if sealed, can age. Now some filters will last longer than other filters. Filters have an indefinite shelf life. That means if a filter's sealed, once it's gone past its expiry date, it's still going to work for a bit longer than its expiry date, but nobody really knows when. So in industry and, for example, military, you're not allowed to have filters outside of an expiry date because you can't rely on them. And obviously they don't want the bad PR of soldiers or workers putting on a respirator and dying because the filter, although it's still been sealed, has expired and bits of it no longer work due to chemical processes and breakdown of materials inside the filter. So, although yes, what I do personally is if I've got filters that are only a few years recently out of date and they're still sealed, I still keep them sealed because I know that they're better than nothing, but I don't know if they're going to work or not. So, as said, what I think you should start doing is, rather than using any old filter that you think might be safe, is to only use more recent filters. That way you're knowingly you're not going to come into contact with anything too nasty. Also, I've done this in another video, you can test if the filter is leaking by shaking it like that over white or black paper. You might want to use a couple of different colours just in case something, like the charcoal is obviously visibly black, some stuff that comes out the filter might be another colour, so do it on maybe a couple of different colours, and if nothing comes out you're fine. And also check the top layer of the filter. If you see stuff that looks like it's leaking out of that, obviously don't use the filter. I've got loads of these GP5 and other Soviet filters, but obviously I don't use them anymore because we know now that's not a good idea. So, we know that all the, say, Soviet filters from the Cold War contained asbestos. Lots of people seem to think as well that filters made in Russia prior to the latest series of filters may contain asbestos. So that's like the PMK and GP7 filters that were green ones like this but shaped a bit differently. I would personally use the logic that don't use anything the Russians made prior to their modern ABE and ABEC style filters with the labels on. They're black canisters, they don't look like this. So that's that about, you know, Soviet filters. In hindsight, you know, I'd say just don't use Soviet filters, simple as. As I've said before, you can get modern Russian filters, the ABE and the ABEC type ones to fit it, but make sure it's those filters. It will clearly say it's an ABE or an ABEC filter, so don't keep asking me, is this an ABEC one, and linking to a GP5 filter, which people want to keep doing. I can't really give you the links, partially because eBay listings of them expire, and also I'm not sure if it's really in, you know, against YouTube's rules to keep giving links to sellers selling things, so you'll have to find them yourself. You can find them if you look hard enough, because every time I actually check for some of the links are always still there for at least several listings. So, yeah. Don't use filters that I'd say are beyond 30 years old. When you open them, check they aren't leaking. Obviously, if you've got a filter that's in good condition, that's within its expiry date, everything should be fine. Modern filters don't really have anything nasty in. Now, they do impregnate charcoal. For example, you can have chromium impregnated charcoal and a few other materials, and that stuff isn't great to breathe in. It's not the massive cancer threat a lot of people have made it out to be. There are big studies, if you read through them in detail and don't skim read them, it basically says, well, if you're exposed to a lot of this, you might have a 1% risk of, you know, getting lung cancer. And also the results were inconclusive for lots of other cancers. So basically what it's saying is it doesn't really statistically give you a risk of getting cancer even if you inhaled it, but you don't want to inhale it. So I'm personally not really worried about chromium filters, just because I've read up on what chromium actually is, the amount that's in gas mask filters, the amount you have to inhale to start doing your body damage, and you know, it's not really a threat. I think when I was reading it, it said something like you'd have to wear a gas mask with a chromium filter that was potentially leaking for hours a day, you know, for several years. So, you know, almost thousands of hours of breathing through a chromium filter, which I don't think anybody who collects gas masks for fun is ever going to do, that's leaking before you get a 1%, you know, increase in lung cancer risk or something. It's something really low. I'm sure if you went out and walked around for a few hours in the city with really bad pollution, you've already done more damage to your lungs from that than you have from using a chromium filter, even if it's got a slight leak. But regardless, with any filter, even if it's not got asbestos or chromium in, let's say it's just a simple cotton particulate filter layer, and then a secondary layer that has just normal activated carbon in, charcoal, you don't want to breathe that in if it's leaking, just because, you know, breathing in coal dust and lumps of cotton aren't going to do your lungs any good. So the best logic to go on is, you know, don't use them if they're leaking. That's quite simple. You know, it's a modern filter with nothing really in it, just a particulate vapour filter. Don't use it. So that's mostly it. There was another point I was going to cover, and that point I was going to cover is also understanding how filters work, because a lot of people don't, and then they spout nonsense that really annoys me. So in a filter you have two layers. You have, regardless if it's been impregnated or not, normally, unless you're buying a particular filter, you have the first layer, which is a particulate filter. And a particulate filter is basically, it stops particles, so particles are things like dust, asbestos, you know, like sand, stuff like that. It's stuff that you can physically see normally, or at least under a microscope could see, but you know, they're bigger than air molecules. And so a particulate filter's job is to stop stuff coming in to the mask that's, you know, like an actual visible airborne threat, or at least not too small. Then you have the charcoal, the activated carbon, that acts as a vapour filter, and that's the things that are more like in like actual gas form, where the molecules are smaller or the same size as oxygen molecules, so the particulate filter can't stop them. People have asked me, why can't you make a particulate filter that stops them? Because if you did, it would just be basically putting your hand over your mouth so you suffocate. If it's totally solid, a particulate filter that stops 100% of everything getting through, then you suffocate because air can't get through. So the particulate filters normally, if you have a P3 filter, it's like 99.5, 99.7% effective, something like that. So it stops nearly everything, and then the stuff it doesn't stop, you need carbon that's impregnated various things to stop various gases. But regardless, that's called vapour. And lots of people keep saying there wasn't asbestos in this filter because it's activated charcoal. That doesn't mean anything. Pretty much every filter from World War II has activated carbon in, as well as, you know, a particulate layer, because you need each thing to filter different things. If they made military filters that were just activated carbon, there would be lots of things that could get through them quite easily. And the filters would also expire much faster because other stuff would cling to the carbon that wasn't vapour. So don't listen to anybody who says this is an activated charcoal filter, it doesn't contain asbestos. Because all the World War II filters with asbestos in, and the like GP5 filters with asbestos in, yes, they have activated charcoal in, but they've also got an asbestos particulate filter in there. So, as a general rule, you know what's in a filter and how they work. They have both a particulate, for most, you know, NBC, CBRN, industrial filters, they will have a particulate filter made of something. It could be asbestos, it could be paper, it could be cotton, it could be fiberglass, you know, anything like that. And then they have the carbon activated charcoal layer to stop the actual gases, the vapours. So they're combination filters, that's the actual name of it, a combination filter. So a combination filter does not just have activated carbon in, it can have nasty stuff in as well. So I've rambled again. If you're somebody who hates these videos, I'm sorry, but I need to keep making them because people will keep asking the same questions over and over, or slightly different questions I haven't addressed before. So hopefully this video's addressed that. And that is that, you know, I'd say the burden of proof with filters means get something you know is to be safe, not something that's vague and then waiting for somebody to prove it has asbestos in. So yeah, with a filter like this, obviously do not use it. But what I'd rather people did was use filters they know to be safe, or don't attach a filter to their respirator. And then if they do get a filter, you know, use the logic of, as long as it's not a Soviet one, it's been made within the last 30 years, do a test to make sure it's not leaking, it's probably safe. But again, this thing isn't intended for you to wear for the sake of wearing it, it's intended to save your life or protect your lungs from harmful chemicals and substances. So they're not 100% safe by definition, because they can't be 100% safe to actually do their job properly. So there you go. Hopefully that's cleared up maybe a few more questions regarding asbestos and other nasty things in old filters.